If this was just a joke, congratulations, you're now getting a series.
What is this show and why is everyone going crazy about it?
So I finally watched Learning with Pibby. It's some really good stuff.
Huh, weird. Must have been a Pibby glitch. There have been very few pilots or proof of concepts in recent years that have set the internet alight quite like Learning with Pibby, or Come and Learn with Pibby if you're annoying. It doesn't require much of an explanation, but for cohesion's sake, let's run down the list. Pibby was created by Dodge Greenlee, and the proof of concept was uploaded to Adult Swim's YouTube channel on the 30th of October 2021, meaning in a few weeks from now it'll have been 2 years since the collapse of civilized society. It was an immediate hit for channeling a lot of late 2000s and early 2010s creepypasta energy, and using that concept to build an entire cartoon show, full of many existing Warner Bros. And Cartoon Network properties being corrupted and focusing on the original characters designed for a children's show slowly losing their innocence. You could say this show is practically made to make it big on the internet, as evidenced by its overwhelmingly positive reception and sheer popularity, to the point where if you're an outsider looking in, you may be under the impression that Pibby was already this huge established franchise when it hadn't even been greenlit yet, which regardless of any personal feelings you may have towards it, is incredibly impressive. 33 million views is crazy. With that much money I could afford, I don't know, a house in London. But despite this series being a surefire success, garnering this much attention as a simple concept and even seemingly being promoted on Adult Swim when they began editing episodes of shows like Rick and Morty, Smiling Friends, and Eric Andre running on the channel with interferences from Pibby glitches, my sense of humor is ruined. Pibby's likeliness of becoming a fully fledged series seems almost entirely in the dirt, as it was recently announced by the creator that the show is unlikely to ever be greenlit, which came out of nowhere to most people who were pretty convinced the show was going to happen based on all of the hype and promotion. Couple this with the growing criticisms people have had towards Pibby for a while now, and the overall resentment a lot of people seem to share towards fans of the pilot and the people hyping it up based on its concept, it feels like Pibby has had quite the tragic fall from grace. And this is a tale I find incredibly interesting because all of the hype, the millions of fans, the number of scathing critiques, all of it spawned from a single pilot that wasn't even confirmed to be greenlit. In this video I aim to go over what exactly happened to Learning with Pibby, going over potential reasons why it being greenlit seems so unlikely, the sheer amount of hype for it, as well as the many reasons people had for their dislike of Pibby and its fans. Some justified, others not so much, and overall going over how Pibby went from the darling of the cartoon community to becoming a laughingstock in the eyes of many, and also going over my own thoughts because I feel the need to weigh in on this before I get another 15 requests to talk about this, and yes, I find all of you equally annoying. Oh my god! Now we need to go over Pibby's basic premise first to get a sense of why people were so drawn to it, and I need to not have a mental breakdown every time I write the phrase Pibby glitch in this script because I will strike a deal with my bathtub and toaster so I can meet God. Learning with Pibby stars, well, Pibby, this thing, an innocent character created for a fictional educational children's show whose world is slowly corrupted by this giant blob of glitchiness that infects, corrupts, and controls anyone who comes into contact with it. It involves Pibby traveling to different worlds belonging to existing Warner Bros. IPs like the Flintstones and Adventure Time, as we see the glitchy entities slowly consume and transform these beloved characters into horrifying monsters, and it's up to Pibby and the other original characters in this show to save the universe. It's a basic infection premise, but its main gimmick is the use of established IPs and the implementation of creepypasta-like imagery. Pibby, from the beginning, was greeted with a truly tremendous amount of hype, and if you use the internet in any capacity, it shouldn't be too hard to see why almost immediately. To explain that though, we're gonna need to discuss le creepypasta for a second. So get your hyper-realistic blood juices pumping and hug your Slenderman body pillow tightly, let's get into it. Creepypastas, while not nearly as prevalent as they used to be, dominated the internet back in the late 2000s and early 2010s. These stories, while obviously not all too scary and are pretty silly by today's standards, were incredibly interesting to read about, especially when it came to lost episode and video game creepypastas. These were usually urban legends about corrupted and haunted video games, or disturbing and morbid episodes of kids' TV shows like SpongeBob and Gumball that would often take advantage of the fact that they were lost episodes by showing graphic content and sensitive topics like or when it came to video games, glitches, and corruptions. Now, I was a child mostly running on morbid curiosity and looking at inappropriate things on the internet behind my parents' backs, sorry mum, and so a lot of my free time online as a kid was spent reading creepypastas and watching videos documenting them. And a lot of people, whether they were kids or adults, were absolutely present during the times where these things were super popular. And while lots of them are incredibly lame by today's standards, I still remember being legitimately creeped out by some of this stuff as a kid. I remember Ben Drown specifically scared the absolute shit out of me, and merely hearing the synopsis for Gumball's The Grieving sent a chill down my spine back then. I was a very impressionable child. Nowadays I can't even look at an image of it without But I think you can see why a show that combines the feelings people experience with these last episode creepypastas and the video game creepypastas was guaranteed to turn a few heads. And admittedly, on a conceptual level, there's plenty of potential here, and it helps that it was on Adult Swim. Adult Swim is generally known for being far more experimental with its programming. It will often greenlight shows that many other networks would likely turn down, and doesn't seem to be as restrictive as other networks either. Pibby caught the attention of so many people because a creepypasta-esque show featuring officially licensed characters from Warner Bros. Lengthy catalogue, including many iconic characters from Cartoon Network shows people watched when they were younger or still do, proved to be interesting at the very least. Now, with that being said, there were plenty of reasonable critiques people had about Pibby, but we'll get into those soon, because the hype surrounding Pibby was truly something to behold. Pilots for cartoons have had pretty strong reactions from the public before. My mind immediately goes to Family Guy and Steven Universe, but I don't think I've seen anything quite on this level before. Before you knew it, there were tons of fan animations, fan fictions, too much fan art for me to even begin scratching the surface, an absolute explosion of theory videos and discussion videos related to it, reaction videos, that's not special actually, a shocking amount of Friday Night Funkin' content for some reason, like a genuinely tremendous amount of Friday Night Funkin' content, which does actually explain a lot of the overlap between fans of FNF and fans of Pibby, which could also explain a good portion of why it got so popular. Like, no joke, this is an entire rabbit hole in and of itself, and I don't play FNF like at all. The last time I did, I broke a fingernail, but the sheer amount of content and how popular it is blows my mind. So suffice to say, Pibby has quite a lot of hype behind it, and while that's great, a lot of people began treating the show like the second coming of hyper-realistic Jesus Christ, with his hyper-realistic blood pouring from his hyper-realistic eyes while everyone sat in their chairs clapping their Sonic.exe plushies together and pogging relentlessly as they drank their bottles of soy and giving out their upvotes to kind strangers, and then as fast as Pibby developed a fan base, it also developed a growing hatedom as well as more reasonable people offering valid criticism. But I think discussing the overhyping from fans will allow you to see things more clearly. Pibby was cool to look at, and I absolutely don't blame people for being enthusiastic and wanting it to be picked up as an actual show. But of course, lots of that enthusiasm led to people hyping the show up to a point where many people started finding it annoying, given that upon closer inspection, it really isn't all too special. Let me explain that for just a second before you kill me. While learning with Pibby on a conceptual level is pretty cool, and it's certainly unique as a pilot for a TV show with a lot of untapped potential, it wasn't entirely groundbreaking for a lot of people. Even looking past the creepypasta exterior, the show at its heart is another property that brings back beloved cartoons, only to do it through the lens of horror and adult subject matter, which is something many of us are not only getting tired of, we're considering forging restraining orders between the creators and executives. The adult corruption of children's media is an overdone concept that lost its novelty years ago, and creepypastas do fall into that category given how many of them are centered around media that can be enjoyed by children. It's partly what made everyone so sick of them, because while they, like any concept, can be done well with enough effort placed into them to make them stand out, a lot of creepypastas and adult takes on children's media usually fall back on the same tired cliches of using blood for shock value, showing plenty of disturbing imagery to corrupt the innocence of the characters, and going purely off of creepypasta cliches here, this glitchy horror imagery while freaky at a glance is not anything new. And this isn't to say Pibby would necessarily fall into any of the common traps, it's just that people were collectively getting kinda tired of this form of adult content. This isn't necessarily a knock towards Pibby itself, but I'm just explaining how a lot of the criticism spawned, because a lot of people began treating the show being loosely inspired by creepypastas as a huge and revolutionary new thing, when really it was just a novelty for them to base the show around. Hype is a natural thing when something is popular, but I'm just gonna be upfront and biased about it. Some Pibby fans are just really annoying, and you can see why a lot of people just turned on the show purely out of spite for these people, because a lot of them talk and act like young kids who are hyping up something that really wasn't that special. People constantly hyping up how terrifying and creepy it all was, because of the use of these well-established characters, how cool it all looked, and also trying to find plenty of depth and other reasons for why it was being held as a masterpiece that just weren't really there. In short, people saw the creepypasta inspiration and hopped on it really quick. And again, there is plenty you can do with that concept, but if you know anything about online discourse and cartoon discourse especially, you'll know that all of these people overhyping and treating the show like the coolest thing ever was bound to spawn counter arguments, given it was all over everyone's Twitter timelines and YouTube feeds for days. Of course, this tweet by the rise and fall of Nick has been copy-pasted to hell and back, but there was also a growing stereotype about fans of Pibby and how a lot of them were usually incredibly young and cringy. And so Pibby very quickly developed its own form of cringe culture that wasn't really helped when the FNF invasion started and brought along the tons of people who also hate FNF. You can imagine it wasn't a very very good mix. Pibby's speed ran the hating things for being popular thing faster than Undertale, and I do not say that lightly. When a lot of people begin hyping a show up to the point where it's literally everywhere while also exaggerating the things that make it interesting as entirely new and revolutionary, and that it's a new standard for horror, a lot of people on the outside looking in who are overly familiar with internet-related horror media and creepypastas are just not going to see the initial appeal, and are going to judge it based on the standards that the fans have placed upon it, which is then going to have negative effects on how the series is viewed by people, since they're just going to see it as a show that's late to hopping on the trend of creepypastas and using it as a crutch, with no other redeeming qualities. That's just how a lot of people currently view Pibby, and I can't say I blame most of them. Obviously there are people over-exaggerating how big their issues with it are, but speaking without any bias here, Pibby isn't really that scary. The imagery is certainly freaky and the concept is disturbing, but scary or straight up terrifying isn't really what comes to mind, and I don't even think the show is trying to be as ultra scary as people are making it out to be. Just disturbing while paying homage to creepypastas. People have questioned a lot about the show as a result of the expectations for it being incredibly inflated, like how they could possibly carry a show based on this concept. What could they do to make it stand out amid other adult shows that corrupt children's media? All questions that seem unreasonable to ask of a simple pilot or proof of concept, and that's because Pibby, despite not even having a show yet, has far outgrown being a simple Adult Swim pilot and is currently seen as a modern staple of internet horror when I doubt that was ever the intention. And those standards are naturally going to attract criticism, and personally speaking right now, while I do think Pibby would have been interesting to see as a full show and I liked the pilots, I don't know if it would really be all that good or impressive. The creator recently showed off a lot of concept art given the show is apparently not getting picked up anytime soon, and this has only caused more people to switch up on Pibby given that a lot of the concept art is, pretty questionable. Obviously it's just concept art and likely not a representation of what the show would be like, but even I have to admit that a lot of it is kinda corny. Like, it's definitely hard to take the dark f***ed up version of the hamburger helper mascot seriously, but people have used this concept art to just trash on the show entirely, which I do think is pretty unfair. While I do think Pibby is way overhyped for what it actually is, and that with the status it's currently at, criticism is only natural, and a lot of it is pretty level-headed and justified, I do think the large amount of hate is pretty undeserved for the most part. But what I think doesn't really matter, given how shockingly divisive Pibby has become in just 2 years. People either treat it as the coolest, scariest thing ever, or an affront to Christ himself. Now we move on to the most shocking part of all of this, Pibby not being picked up for a full show. Considering how absurdly popular the pilot was, being one of the most viewed videos on Adult Swim's YouTube channel, along with the entire April Fool's promotion where Pibby crossed over into other shows for an hour, this decision seems incredibly baffling from a business standpoint. Regardless of my own thoughts on Pibby and everyone else's thoughts, this is one of the most successful proof of concepts for a cartoon show, period. It is a moneymaker waiting to be made. So why is it so unlikely to be greenlit? Well, I can probably think of a few good reasons as to why, but the main reason would probably be licensing. Even though Pibby is aiming to be on Adult Swim, which is a subsidiary of Cartoon Network which is owned by Warner Brothers, which does give them some easier access to Warner Brothers' library of characters compared to other characters from Disney or Nickelodeon, the process for crossing over of one TV show is not easy, let alone the insane number that Pibby showed off in its pilots. Gigantic IPs here too, like Scooby-Doo, Adventure Time, Steven Universe, Powerpuff Girls, the list goes on. I can't imagine it would be very easy to get all of these shows to cross over of this one newcomer, especially when it's for the purposes of horror and shock value, and has nothing to do with the original show's appeal to children. I don't work in TV obviously, so I don't know the specifics of everything, but I can imagine quite a few executives sweating like crazy just at the thought of this show. That's not even considering the few things in the pilot that aren't owned by Warner Brothers, like straight up including a scene set in SpongeBob's bathroom. Viacom doesn't let you get away with uploading a 10-second clip of the show on YouTube. Can you imagine the stroke one of their lawyers had upon seeing this? I wanna see that actually, because you. Some people have wrongly theorized that the recently revealed concept art and show bibles are why the show isn't being picked up. And yeah, while concepts like The Darkness apparently being a manifestation of 2017 meme culture is brain-bustingly stupid, that's really not a valid reason for why it would get canned or shelved. Hasn't stopped people from using it to clown on Pibby relentlessly though. Even though Pibby has had a lot of critics for a while, a lot of them have popped up now that the series was announced to not be picked up. And again, there are plenty of good arguments people have had about the series, and yes, the fans are annoying to an extent, but this just comes off as really petty, and it's pretty depressing to see Pibby fall off this hard. Obviously it may one day be greenlit, but as it stands, Pibby's reputation has taken a massive hit for things that were completely outside of anyone's control, and that on top of everything else definitely hurts. It's a complicated situation because I'm not really much of a fan of Pibby myself, but it's still kinda sad to look at given how much people were singing its praises only 2 years ago. I'm sure Pibby will continue to exist online for a while given it's still pretty popular, but the show not being picked up is definitely a massive blow. Anyway, I don't know how to end this video. Play Yakuza or something, I don't know.